Believe it or not, Warhammer 40k Darktide does actually have a story, and today, in order to find out what the fuck is happening in that story, I've brought JoPlaysGames. Joe, would you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell everyone what you're all about?
Hello, I'm JoPlaysGames. I do a series on Darktide called No, Seriously, What the Fuck is Happening in Darktide? I am a big 40k fan in general, and I also have a background in creative writing.
Awesome, yes, and today, like I said, we are going to review basically the entire story of Darktide, highlight a lot of its major details, compare what is happening in Darktide to Dan Abnett's other works, considering that Dan Abnett did write the story for Darktide, and we're going to be talking about things like how the story is delivered to the player and where the story is going. So, Joe, would you take us through the broad strokes of what's actually happening here?
All right, so you have an Inquisition warband run by Inquisitor Grenle, and it has essentially partnered with supposedly longtime friend of Grenle, Emora Brahms, captain of the ship the Morning Star. They're a rogue trader ship, and they've come to Atoma Prime to essentially fight this incursion or uprising that's happening currently in Tertium, which is the, I believe, capital city of Atoma Prime, and Atoma Prime itself is the capital city of the entire Mobian domain, where they are having problems with with what we now know is a full-blown demonic viral infection brought on by Nurgle into Atoma.
Yeah, and this is done with two factions, right? It's the Cult of Admonition, and
yes, there's the Cult of Admonition, and then the Mobian 6. The Mobian 6 used to be probably the most effective celebrated regiment in all of the Mobian sector as far as Astra Militarum forces go. They got deployed to a planet called Nox Alpha and encountered chaos and ended up falling to chaos there, turning traitor, and then revealing themselves as traitor on Atoma whenever they were supposed to be assisting with essentially trying to contain this outbreak that's been going on in the Hive City. You know, there's been a lot of talk, even amongst the characters themselves. Well, why not just exterminate Atoma? Why not destroy it? Well, Atoma is considered too strategically valuable because there is a substance that is produced in the Mobian domain called Mobian steel. And even modern Mobian steel makes such better quality, you know, like tanks and munitions and things like that, that they're like, it's too important. This is where the bulk of it is produced. We can't destroy it. And then it turns out that they've actually gone a step further and found the original recipe for Mobian steel and are able to make the material from, like, you know, centuries ago that's even better. So Atoma is too valuable, too important, and the situation would basically have to get to crazy levels of incomprehensibly bad. There's no way they would win for them to even consider Exterminatus, which we may or may not get to, because it seems that Admonition themselves are working on trying to summon a greater demon into the physical realm.
That's right, and the narrative itself seems so grand. Like, there's a lot to be lost if we lose the planet of Atoma. So what exactly is our role in the narrative, the player's role?
So the player's role, essentially, Grenle seems to run a pretty light retinue as far as like getting help from other resources within the Imperium. Grenle specifically, it definitely is not conventional. Yeah. Grenle seems to, and this is very, very Eisenhorn like, he seems to like to pick up almost kind of black sheep people that he meets throughout his journeys that he sees as particularly talented or resourceful or valuable. And then essentially make use of their talents, where he tends to eschew calling in specifically, you know, like, hey, I'm, going to a commissar or something and being like, guess what? I'm pulling your, your entire retinue or whatever to come help me fight this battle, or working with, different chapters of Space Marines or something like that. He seems to tend to eschew that kind of direction for his engagements and how he wants to handle taking care of things. And so our role in Darktide is that essentially we, for whatever reason, valid or not, have been put on a ship where we were essentially sentenced to death. We were scheduled for execution once we arrived at where our original location was intended, where we were going to be going, and we were going to be executed. But instead, we were found so damn useful whenever the Tankard Bastion got attacked and saved Explicator Zola's life that she was like, you know what? These people aren't really all that different from me and where I was whenever I came into service of the Inquisition. So why not make use of these, thousands of conscripts who say that they're loyal to the Emperor? Let's give them an opportunity to let them prove it and come fight for us.
Quick aside here, I think it's so funny how during the character creation, you can kind of choose what you did to land you on that prison vessel. And I love how the crimes, if we can even call them crimes, they range from just really silly things to like really serious things. And
yeah,
it's just nuts what the Imperium will imprison you for. Just ridiculousness. But and then of course we just as another aside, we also have the Arbites, which are basically just martial forces from Tertium and Atoma that are now basically helping Inquisitor Grenle because they have lost patience with Inquisitor Grenle. He's not getting results fast enough for their liking. So they're stepping in now, regardless of his Inquisitor authority.
Yes, it seems that the story reason for them not having been present, because they would have been present in Tertium the entire time. They definitely had precinct fortresses and stuff like that throughout different districts. It seems that they were kind of almost taking a step back in like, a show of respect to him, being like, all right, the Inquisition is here. You guys are going to handle it. They've gone however long, it seems probably on the scale of months, with the situation doing nothing but escalating and getting worse. And so now they have stepped in and have, basically the little pep talk that they give on their introduction cutscene is basically like, we have failed the tithe and we've, kind of allowed this interloper to come in and try to handle the situation, and he hasn't. So now like it's up to us to like help everybody, we got to get this shit together so then we can restore the tithe and keep, people into the Militarum, and then also, that Mobian steel and those materials into the Militarum to keep in good standing with the Imperium.
Yeah, and Joe, you'd mentioned earlier Eisenhorn and how basically Inquisitor Grenle has a couple of different things that we can kind of like elements that we can compare to Eisenhorn's story. And I think that one of the reasons for that is because, if you guys don't know, Dan Abnett did actually write the story for Darktide. And I think that Dan Abnett, he's definitely my personal favorite author for the Black Library and for Warhammer 40k books in general. But Dan Abnett definitely has a certain writing style and a certain like power leveling system that he likes to employ with his books. For example, if you were to go watch the Astartes animation, which is phenomenal and badass, the Astartes are just absolute crazy tanks that move at a million miles per hour, and they're just this crazy unstoppable force. They're not necessarily really like that in Dan Abnett's novels. They're much more grounded. They're able to be killed by guardsmen using full charge blasts of their last guns and stuff like that. Joe, what connections exist between Dan Abnett's novels, his writing, and what we're seeing play out in Darktide?
Well, So interestingly, before Darktide even came out, Fat Shark kind of had like a Q&A on their website about it at some point or something. And one of the things was like, oh, if I want to read some Warhammer books, you know, in preparation for Darktide to like understand it better, get into it better, what would you recommend? And their two recommendations were the Eisenhorn, you know, trilogy, omnibus, what have you, and then Gaunt's Ghost. And I'll probably reference Eisenhorn the most just because like Eisenhorn was an Inquisitor. It's all about the Inquisition, which
absolutely
parallels really closely to Darktide, obviously. But essentially, like what connections exist? So there's a ton of themes. Darktide's story itself seems to lean, I don't want to say leans heavily on Eisenhorn, but I definitely see elements from Eisenhorn as well as a little bit of Gaunt's Ghost, potentially more so the first one.
I would say it actually leans much more on Ravener because of Ravener's condition and how he utilizes his warband in order to get things done. Because he himself isn't going out and being the action hero that someone like Eisenhorn would be. He's more in the background. He's kind of like playing a game of chess against the enemy, so to speak, which is kind of what Grenle seems to be doing.
Yeah, no, that's completely fair. I'm currently like still reading through Eisenhorn, and so it's just like so front and center in my brain anytime I think about Darktide. But Ravener is definitely far more apropos, especially for Grenle himself, because Ravener done got fucked up real bad in a fight and basically got, you know, stuck in a
Professor
wheelchair.
X. He's
Professor
Xavier.
basically just Professor X. Yeah, and you know, while we still have yet to get any final confirmation in Darktide's story itself, that seems to be fairly similar to Grendel's situation. So,
yeah. And I guess speaking of the story, you know, there are a lot of things that we just don't know about Darktide's story at all. You know, it's not like a cut and dry presentation like Space Marine 2, where you have this definitive campaign with cutscenes. Space Marine 2 now actually has like its entire little own lore section and its achievements, and you can kind of read about like your allies and your enemies and all that stuff. It's all in the game for you. Darktide's story is delivered a little differently, so let's talk about that. Darktide does have a campaign now. John, I'm pretty sure you're the only person who's actually played through all of it. I think the rest of us skipped it. So how is the campaign?
I have played through it 2 or 3 times now. That's actually the video that I'm working on right now, is my like full just like beat for beat breakdown of like what we get in the campaign that helps like flesh it out, you know, the story and everything. The campaign itself is actually, especially if you are a like Darktide story enthusiast specifically, it is 100% worth playing. A lot of the missions are going to be almost identical to what they were before they got put into a campaign order. But there are definitely, 2 of the 3 hourglass missions are in the campaign, and both of them have had their dialogue completely rewritten. It reintroduces the mysterious cultist who we heard before in the Vox Intercept 6, who spoke to Rinda after her surgery.
What are those Vox Intercepts? Are those in game?
No, I was actually gonna say, so whenever you were saying like Darktide's story is delivered in a much more different, I was like, oh my god, dude, so Fat Shark has all of these bits and pieces just sprinkled throughout almost, I think pretty much their social, well, actually, if you count YouTube as a social media platform, then sprinkled throughout all the different like platforms that they essentially have touchstones with their audience on. Yeah. And all of those things not in the game whatsoever. It's kind of crazy. So
it's an interesting choice. Yeah, it's an interesting choice to make really important lore and story beats only accessible in promotion material.
it's beyond that. They also put super important like story and character development and like those arcs and things like that in like the blog section of their website through their short stories and everything. And like these things, there are things in there that are just like completely critical to understanding what's going on. One of the really early short stories that came out, I believe it came out before the game itself even launched. It was one of those like lead up pieces to like get you ready to understand what was happening in the game. I could be wrong about that. I'd have to go back and look at the original. Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at the date that it was actually released, but it's essentially about just like how did Tertium's or the Torrent's water supply come to be infected, and there's a specific thing that's found in like the water cistern or something, or like a cauldron that's like dripping into the water cistern. And I still haven't gone back and run it again since I had this discussion with somebody on my stream. I read it as like a plague ogren finger, like a severed plague ogren finger or something like that, but somebody was saying it was actually a plague marine finger. And I was like, wait, what? Like, did I completely miss that? So that's something I have to go back and read on. But just like, you know, there's stuff in their blogs. They have short stories that aren't in the blog section. They're posts on the forums. They have their YouTube channel where they have like these Vox messages and Vox intercepts that essentially, you know, are like between characters or telling us what's going on in the story and stuff like that. They have Vox intercepts that they're labeled as being for the Grim Protocols update that they put in a playlist on their YouTube channal and then never actually put out or like informed the community that they're there.
Used as promotional material. It's just they just are existing in the nether. They're in the void.
Yeah, but you can still access them. And like sometimes I'm kind of like, are they just trying to see how much attention we're paying? Like, are they trying to get a barometer on like which ones of us in the, like, how many people in this community are just like so unhinged that they're like, oh shit, I thought to check the playlist to see if there was anything there, and there was, like, because they just have these different things just shoved into like every little nook and cranny, and you have to be diligent and like know where to look and like remember where all these things were, and you can collect all of the pieces and like scoop them all together and then figure out where to plug them in this story that exists in the game to kind of like start getting the bigger picture and make sense of it all.
That being said, though, there is still a lot within the game, primarily delivered to the player in the form of casual small talk that the Rejects are having between themselves or with the warband or crew of the Morningstar, and then also with, I think, my favorite way to deliver story to the player, the Martyr Skulls. And one of the reasons why I really enjoy Martyr Skulls is because it's kind of reminiscent of Dark Souls storytelling, where you find an item, weapon, piece of armor, whatever, and then each weapon or armor piece kind of has like its own little lore tidbit, a summary of what that weapon was used in or who wielded it, what that character was all about, in addition to other lore and story tidbits. That's kind of what the Martyr Skulls deliver. I think it's really cool. Joe, what do you think? Because the Martyr Skulls did not always exist in the game, right? Like they were added, I think, a year ago or so.
They were added. Oh man, I want to say that the Martyr Skulls were added as part of the
penance system.
I was gonna say the Path to Redemption update in April or March, late March or early 24? April of 2020. Yep, 2024.
Yeah.
And that is whenever they introduced Hestia Prime, the penance system, and also reworked the Hab Draco mission.
Yeah, and they've kind of been slowly. It's really funny, guys. So Darktide has been out for around 2 years now.
Coming up on 3 years.
On 3 years, and the game's story has not actually progressed. What the game has been doing up until this point, with the exception of the Arbites getting involved, what the game has been doing up until this point is kind of just like refining the story and delivering more and more bits of lore to the player in the form of initially just the missions and character dialogue. And because there was no campaign when the game released, it was just these missions that were kind of like loosely connected. And then eventually the penances, the martyr skulls, we started to get much more description, the Vox transmissions, of course, and then now finally the campaign, where you have the, I think, pretty amazing cutscene of Captain Wolfer on Nox Alpha getting corrupted by Nurgle's influence.
Oh, that cutscene's so good.
It's really cool. It's really, really cool.
Yeah, I will, however, disagree with you about that the story hasn't been moved forward. So okay. I personally think, especially in the scope of whenever you look at like a typical story structure, usually you talk about stories in 3 acts. You kind of have like, you know, you're establishing one, setting up your heroes, getting the whole group together. Then the next act, you're going to have, you know, act 2, you're going to have something happen that's going to take your characters down to like that lowest point. And then act journey. 3, you have that redemption arc. So if we kind of look at Darktide in the scope of like the hero's journey, I think that the Dark Communion was the end of Act 1, because essentially like it has been so many updates, so many Darktide updates. I have found myself just kind of going like, what is going on with them adding, you know, like Commissar Duquesne or Hestia Prime or Swagger or, you know, all these different characters that are just kind of seeming sometimes like they're coming out of left field. I think Swagger is a perfect example because like Hestia Prime, she makes a certain amount of sense because she's from the Ministorum. She's here to like essentially keep track of our deeds to see if we have essentially like by the time this whole thing is over, if any of us are still alive, will we have done enough good deeds in service of the Imperium that we can consider our sins that were going to get us put to death originally paid for? Can we essentially walk at the end if any of us are still alive? So she makes sense. You know, all these different characters make sense. Swagger is still just like a big loose hanging thread. But the whole point I'm trying to make is like, we've spent this whole act getting all these characters together, getting our major players for like who are our good guys, then spending a lot of time getting, you know, all these major players for like who are our bad guys, who are our villains that we're going to be,
who are the antagonists.
Yes, and like what are the ones that we're going to be spending the most time with? So we've had all that done, and then Act 1 kind of culminates in a like overall just like, all right, let's finish setting the stage here. What are these antagonists trying to do? What is their ultimate goal? And now we know that. So now I think that, you know, they finally did that. They finished Act 1. Now we are set up perfectly to start getting into Act 2 and
the escalation.
Personally, I'm hoping get the rug ripped out from under us and just immediately start getting hammered with that whole like shit's about to get real dark and start to look real bad for us.
Absolutely, and I think now is a great time to talk about where the story is going, where we think it's heading. And I know that you recently put out a video, and I'll pop that up on the screen, where you talked about them potentially teasing Chaos Space Marines because of a certain piece of dialogue that you found in one of, or not even dialogue, just a sentence that popped up on the screen, a message in the campaign.
It's a screen cap.
It's literally, it's literally a screen cap. And
it's literally a blink and you'll miss it moment.
Yeah, and you broke this down though. You extrapolated this and you broke this down, and it potentially teases that Terminators are involved on Tertium or will get involved, and it would kind of make sense just from the player standpoint because as a reject or as a rank and file Arbites, you're not gonna get much information out of leadership. It's not going to happen. They're going to keep you in the dark. You're not going to know as much as you could, not necessarily should, but as much as you could because they don't want you to get the wrong idea, potentially start asking questions, and eventually fall into chaos, the thing that they're fighting. So they're going to keep you in the dark as much as possible, so it kind of makes sense. Chaos Space Marines could already be engaging with Imperium forces on Tertium or on Atoma in general. So what do you think about all that, Joe? Like, do you think that that is the direction that the story is heading?
I think for right now, the major beat. So yeah, I think that that one. So it's actually from the new campaign, in the new campaign story order. That's from the mission where you go and you send the message using the relay station that's on top of Archivum Sycorax, essentially.
Yeah.
And at the end of that one, so in the campaign, just to like give a little bit of background here, in the campaign, whenever you get those end mission debrief cutscenes, it will show you, like, it often shows us like different information cards about like the different like Maro, Zola, all those characters, and it shows like essentially their clearance level and then like what their role in the warband is. And for the most part, like Maro, Ranick, Zola, Hadron, I think pretty much all of them have like the highest clearance level for like information access. And Maro is the one who debriefs us on this mission whenever we see this like still from part of what the message contained. And even Maro said that he doesn't know what's in this message. The members of the warband who have the highest information clearance, even they don't know what the fuck Grenle is sending this message about. So he's playing this one super close to the vest.
Oh, yeah.
And then in that still, we see the message. So like most of it's blurry and you can't really make it out. But there are two critical parts that we can make out. And the first one is deployment log Terminator squads. And then recon scout drone class. To me, that says two things about what we should expect. And they kind of come together in a pretty clear picture, in my opinion, as to what's going to happen. And I think that it's backed up by what we've seen in the story of Darktide so far. Terminator squads, where 40K is concerned, is only one thing. That's Space Marines. I don't believe that there's anything else in 40K that is called a Terminator squad.
No, there isn't. There really isn't.
I tried, I was like, I don't think that there is. And then I did some looking into it to see if maybe historically there was or anything, and I couldn't find anything. And then the thing where it says Recon Scout Drone Class. In current 40K, there's two armies that have units called drones. One is Tau. And I think that we can pretty safely rule them out.
We're not going to include the anime boys? We're not going to include the weebs in Darktide?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say in this one, probably not.
Wow.
But where we do have faith. Drones.
No faith in the Emperor.
I'm sorry that I'm no faith in the power of anime, honestly. Yeah, but and I apologize for my lack of faith in the heart of the cards there. But I personally think that it's probably more likely that it's referring to Nurgle
Death
drones.
Guard, yeah.
So essentially, yep. Well, and also just like the demons, like the blight drones and stuff like that, because that is in current tabletop and current 40K.
Absolutely.
So personally, I think that we're looking at a demonic anniversary update. Probably, I would certainly hope at this.
That would be so cool. I want to fight Nurglings. I want to fight their little fucking smiling faces. I want to blow them up with my plasma gun. Those fucking little assholes. I want to fight plague bearers. I want to fight drones. I want to fight the everything. Like, I want to fight all the Nurgle things. I'm a massive lore nerd, and anytime a Nurgle demon is presented in one of the books, they're just so fucked up. Like, they're so messed up because they're just super happy in the middle of like all this carnage, slaughter, and famine. Like, it's just so unsettling, and I want to kill them all. So I really, really hope that we get more enemies. And like you said, I think that that's exactly where the story is going. I know that, Joe, we've kind of both done this on our channels at this point. We've both speculated about Genestealer cults. Is there any chance that they appear in the story at all?
Oh, I mean, there's a whole bunch of different avenues that they could take. I mean, obviously, whenever I made my first Darktide video, and it was based on like Vox 10, I want to say, or Vox 9, where essentially the original Wormwood agent was like, you know, there's something hunting me. And I was like, well, that's just not very Nurgle. And, you know, to this day, that one still has me tilting my head a little, but I think that we're seeing a little bit more clearly where that's coming from now. But anyways, you know, at the time, like, I was like, oh, maybe it will be, because there was also all those voice lines
it was
in
actually,
the beginning of the
they're getting hunted by 3 Nurglings in a trench coat.
Obviously, yes. And they've been here the whole time.
Yep.
Well, like back in the beginning of the game, there were all those voice lines about like Zola and how there was like some kind of like schism, you know, mentally and emotionally within Zola, something that she's wrestling with, but then she also didn't even know that she was wrestling with it. And like that combined with the whole Genestealer and goes like, oh, holy shit, what if like one of our own people in the warband was infected and we didn't even know it? Like, that's going to be our avenue. And then, you know, that pretty clearly got put to bed. I don't think I think it's highly unlikely to be the case anymore. But then, you know, we got introduced.
Are you saying that Zola might be a host? Like, she might be a host of the Genestealer's Kiss?
Yeah, so I was thinking originally that the way that they might introduce it is that Zola may have exactly been essentially like an original infectee, and that she was compromised within our warband, and that would be like the story avenue through which they would introduce Genestealer cults.
Damn, that kind of lines up. That checks out, because Zola's like a 10 out of 10 in my book.
Obviously, so yeah, I mean, she would definitely be spreading the curse of the four-armed emperor.
Yep.
But I mean, that's also kind of the thing too, is just like story-wise, like how would you hide that if she was like having a baby or something?
Well, yeah, exactly. No, I think all those story tidbits actually more line up with Zola's relationship with Wolfer. Now that we have more information on their relationship, a lot of that stuff makes sense now, because she was wrestling with the fact that, like, oh no, like, Wolfer might be the guy we're after. Like, crap.
Well, and also her probably twin brother.
Her brother, yeah.
I strongly suspect that they're probably going to end up being twins, but definitely at the very least her brother, Tibber and Zola.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, you know, now it makes the Orthus offensive and everything make a lot more sense whenever she's like, you know, I have to get to Wolfer, I have to know. And Rhaenyk's like, know what? And she hesitates. She can't bring herself to be like, look, I have to level with you. I think that our arch heretic might be my brother.
Yeah.
I strongly suspect that Grenle knows. I think that Grenle probably knows, and that's probably why he wanted her. But yeah, that seems to be the whole thing about like what Zola's hiding, what she's wrestling about within herself, what she doesn't even. So essentially, like, there was a Psyker line where it's like, yeah, Zola has some kind of like dark secret that not even she knows for sure. And I think that was supposed to be setting up, you know, like, once she got to the Tankard Bastion and she locked eyes with this person who's like, you know, basically rotted away visually, but seeing the name like Byron Wolfer on her thing and like looking at this person, I think that's whenever she started to go like, oh no.
Yeah, things are starting to click for her. Yeah.
Yeah. And essentially she's just like in that deep denial. But so I think she's off the table for Genestealer cults.
Yeah.
Other avenues, you know, obviously we got introduced to Clandestine Gloriana, which was a completely frozen over thing. I still, especially if they follow the pattern, if Fat Shark follows the pattern that they have for different, you know, like map zones, I would be incredibly surprised if we never get a Gloriana part 2 or part 3. And since the whole thing about like the reason why Gloriana was frozen over is that essentially like the cooling system for the true Mobian steel production facility got left on, but like obviously the facility itself shut down because it was abandoned. That's why it all froze over. So now that that machine's back on, generating that heat again and everything, I would be very surprised if we don't see that zone thaw out. And I would bet you anything that there's something under that ice. If that ends up being something to do with the current Nurgle situation that we're fighting and find ourselves in, or if it ends up being something like there was a Genestealer cult, you know, there, and somebody made a decision to like essentially shut it down and like freeze the place. Who knows? And then of course there has been a major development in the whole Genestealer thing in the story, through Brahms's memories from the Arbites update, where we found out that whenever so there's been a rumor in the game between the rejects since the beginning of the game that Morrow participated in something called the Purgation of Xanatros, where he supposedly fought wall-to-wall Genestealers and was the sole survivor of the situation. And we now know that that is 75% true, the way that our rejects heard it. The one thing that wasn't correct is that Brunt was with him. And so Brunt was also on Xanatros with Morrow doing this whole purgation thing, taking care of the Genestealer situation. Come to find out that while they were at Xanatros, somehow a Genestealer made it on board the Morningstar. And Brunt essentially personally handled the situation. He killed he fought it and killed the Genestealer. And now Brunt's missing. So that's a concern.
Yeah, I always looked at Clandestium Gloriana with kind of the same skeptical theory, because I've always like thought like it would be, well, not nigh impossible, because we haven't seen this play out in any other video game except for Space Hulk Deathwing, where in Space Hulk Deathwing you're literally you're a Space Marine in a Terminator suit fighting against Genestealers. And they're tough. Like they are really tough. They're portrayed to be a little bit out of the scope of your typical, like, you know, veteran, zealot, psyker, ogre, and arbitrator. And it would make sense, however, for you to fight, you know, second, third generation Genestealers, those who have not made it to that pure strain Genestealer level yet. And this kind of brings us back to Clandestium Gloriana and how basically these Genestealers, these first, second, and third generations, they've just been stalled. They've been trapped, and that entire cult is lost in the what's it called, the Interstellar Void Zone or whatever. And
Void Zone, yeah.
And they've not made it to that fourth generation yet, but their return could be imminent, and it could be approaching fast because of the cultist activity, the admonition activity, and the Mobian activity. That's kind of where my headspace has always been at in regards to the Genestealers and their potential involvement.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the more likely candidates at this point for how they would get introduced. I mean, people have also clocked on since the beginning of Darktide, like the whole water cartel thing. Oh, well, they're dressed, they're awful purple,
sure.
which is typically like
exactly.
one of the major colors of Genestealer cult factions. And then also, so Swagger gets the information on where Inner Zone Void Omega 12 is from the water cartel.
From a couple of baldies.
Yeah, and we actually get to see those guys, and there's one in the background that you never get to get like a really good clear look at, but like you can kind of see he's like moving his face around and everything. Like his face is fucked, dude. Either that guy is like a former, you know, Mobian who is stationed on Nox Alpha, and his face has been like severely Nurglified, or he's got something else going on with his bone structure and just like his whole face structure and everything, to the point where I'm like, oh, good lord, like looks awful Xenos to me.
Yeah. I guess speaking of like all these threats, Joe, like, you know, you've got potentially Genestealer cults, you've got potentially Chaos Space Marine involvement. What the heck is stopping Grenle from just making a phone call with an astropath and calling in the Grey Knights, or more realistically, like the Death Watch or the Exorcists? The Exorcists would be like the perfect Space Marine chapter for this because they are resistant against demonic possession, which we see a lot of on Tertium. What the heck is stopping Grenle from doing that?
Well, that's a really good question, and we don't know for sure. That's the unfortunate thing with Darktide, and again, why I kind of feel like we probably finished Act 1 with the Dark Communion, because we have a whole lot of different pieces of setup that are just primed to like start confirming a whole bunch of information left and right out of the gate. One of the major things that was set up this year, 2025 in Darktide, is that we likely know, because one of the big mysteries has been, who's Grenle? Where is Grenle? Why isn't the Inquisitor here? What's happening? Is anyone actually driving this bus? Can anyone tell me what we're trying to do?
Exactly, yeah.
And they have definitely set us up to be answering that question again through the Mortis trial memories of Emora Brahms this time. It would seem that Grenle is Emora Brahms' great-grandfather, and he is probably trapped on the Morning Star because according to Emora's mother, supposedly this character that, if he isn't Grenle, I don't know who the fuck else we could be, so I'm just going to assume he's Grenle.
Yeah.
Grenle supposedly made some kind of sacrifice a long time ago that supposedly saved billions. And now this character seems to be completely trapped on the Morning Star and not able to leave. He seems to be like fused with it, whether that's a Lotera Saren kind of situation where like he still has a physical body but it's melded into the ship, or and this answers your question as to like why wouldn't Grenle be calling for backup from like all these different avenues that he'd be calling in, you know, help from the Imperium proper. He has his friend Magos Biologist Karib, who I think it's fairly likely that they worked together to transfer Grendel's consciousness or soul into a completely digital version and essentially like melded that into the Morning Star, which is heresy of the highest degree. Essentially AI, true conscious sentient AI in 40K is like extremely forbidden, because millions and millions of years ago humanity was almost wiped out from an AI uprising, basically. And it was such a terrible moment in humanity's history that like millennia, like tens of millennia later, it's still deeply forbidden.
That's why we have servitors to handle all basic tasks instead of AI, which is fucked up in its own right, but that is the grim darkness of Warhammer 40K. When presented with the evidence that we now have of who or what Grenle could potentially be, we also actually have dialogue that points to the fact that Karib could be working on a solution right now for Grenle that progresses the narrative even more, and which also kind of like offers an explanation of like why isn't Grenle more directly involved right now, and then also why isn't he calling for any help or assistance from these avenues that pretty much any Inquisitor, if they have the evidence that Grenle likely has of an incursion of this scope, they would be able to exercise these resources on the planet or in the system. They certainly would. We have plenty of evidence of that from Dan Abnett's own writing in the Inquisitor series, pretty much like all 8 or 9 books or whatever. So he totally could. He's just choosing not to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I think that it is very much a move of self-preservation on his part.
Yep.
Not only because, like, if it were to be found out, if this is what happened that, he and Karib did, not only would they be both marked as like Diabolus, however you choose to say it, and hunted down and try to be expunged with extreme prejudice by the Inquisition themselves. It also would completely mess up, because it seems that Karib has been like performing experiments and things, and essentially like pushing the Morning Star to its max on what it's able to produce power wise and everything. And these experiments are extremely important to Grenle, so it definitely seems that they've been working on something to try and at least somewhat reverse his situation. And if they were essentially to have, like the actual hand of the Imperium come in and not only find out about like what they had done, it also would completely ruin anything that they were working towards to try and fix him.
Absolutely. And, we've talked about kind of the direction the story is heading. We've talked about potential new enemies being added to the game. What assistance can we see come from the Imperium, especially in the form of new classes? Like, what is realistic? What has been mentioned by our characters, or just any other tidbits in game that we've found that would basically provide some modicum of evidence for other new classes outside of the Arbites? I feel like with the Arbites, they were added, and we were told this specifically by Darktide's design director, Victor Magnuson. They were added because the idea or concept of a pet class was very popular in Vermintide 2 with the Necromancer. And so there's, of course, a lot of meta information just outside of game information that could indicate what the next class is going to be. But is there any evidence in game of what we could potentially see?
There's a lot. So we kind of know now with the way that they introduced the Arbites, that was actually a class that had almost no telegraphing. That one came completely out of left field, in my opinion. Yeah. I don't really recall any of the characters ever having voice lines about, like, oh, I wish, because I've definitely heard the ones where they're like, oh, what we need here, a squad of Space Marines or something. I don't remember any. Yeah, I don't remember them ever being like, we need some feds. We need some alphabet boys on the case here. Yeah, we 4 convicts would like to call in the police, please. But I mean, like, it's worked really well. And I think that the way that they handled that with, like, the way that they worked it in is like, okay, well, obviously it's the Adeptus Arbites. They are 100% going to have a presence on every capital planet through every segmentum or, domain or whatever in the entire Imperium. So like, obviously they've been here the whole time. Here's our reason why they haven't been active and why they're getting involved now. And also the other thing that I love is they made it very, very clear that not all future classes are going to have to be rejects as well, because I felt like that could have potentially really minimized the scope on what we could have seen.
It would have been super limiting.
It would have been, or, you would have had to have gone the other direction where like any like story development reasoning would have just been super ham-fisted and just felt not congruent with the rest of the story. But it doesn't even matter because they handled it perfectly. So as far
classes,
as like
what classes do you see coming to the game?
So really the beauty of Darktide is that as far as like our major options, damn near everything is on the table. And part of that is through adding in all these different characters that they have. Because like, for example, Hestia Prime, she's from the Ministorum. She's actually from the same, like essentially organization that the Sisters of Battle would be from. She's just not a Sister of Battle. She's from the nerd division, not the fighting division.
Exactly.
And so it's just like, okay, we know that we have essentially, like a connection there, a story beat there, potentially Sisters of Battle, because I know that's a huge one people have been, asking for. The other thing too is like, I know Admech is a really popular ask. Well, we already are working with
Hadron.
Yeah, and Karib and KX, and we have these ins with the Adeptus Mechanicus that could be a really good story hook in that way. There's now,
plus, Mobian Steel is a big deal. That is a well guarded secret of the sector. Like
Clandestine Gloriana is probably the most holy site for the Admech in all of the domain, if
absolutely.
not one of the most, if not the most.
That and that then in my opinion would warrant a contingent of like Skitarii Rangers, for example. Like go reclaim this holy site for the Omnissiah.
There's absolutely that, and then there's also the whole thing. So I have long suspected, for reasons that I won't get into right now, but that there is at least one member of the Dark Mechanicum at work with Admonition. And so if that were to be the case, essentially the Adeptus Mechanicus, they have a lot of agency that nobody else in the Imperium does. And so they like to handle things as internally as possible whenever it comes down to like chasing down heretics and everything like that.
Yep.
So I could also see that if that ended up being the case, there you go. There's your avenue there for like bringing in the Admech as a player character, because they're like, great, we're here now to like hunt down this traitor and bring them to justice within our system.
Absolutely.
So potentially that. Personally, right now, I think that probably the most likely is Aeldari. And because we've had the introduction of like confirmation now that there's Aeldari ships that are essentially hovering around the Morning Star.
Yeah, they're watching what's going on.
They're watching what's going on. They're watching specifically the Morning Star with like a very intense eye, and they keep like approaching and almost looking like they're going to engage and then breaking off and fucking off, and like nobody understands why. And then Fripp, I think recently, or maybe it's an older one, I'm not entirely sure, but has like essentially pulled he does amazing work with his shorts and essentially like pulling really, really clean takes of player
dialogue,
player voice lines that are in the game, and then like compiling them, just being like, hey, here's some really interesting conversations our rejects have that you may not have heard. And one of them is about the Aeldari, and essentially, like I believe them potentially coming to like, work with us or something like that. And then we also know through one of the Vox intercepts that actually never got properly released, but is like available in the playlist, that Grenle, it seems that Grenle has worked with them before. Because we there's that Wormwood agent.
Not just the Vox transmissions, but also through the memories from Mortis Trials. We have way more voice lines talking about Aeldari and stuff like that. Are you speaking about the Wormwood agent one, where she said, like, this isn't like whatever planet they were on, there are no Aeldari to bail them out
Canopus now? Yep, it's Canopus all, tell Grenle I tried my best. Tell Grenle it's Canopus all over again, except this time there's, no way out, no Aeldari swoop ship to come and, like, take off the fire or something like that. So at this point, I highly suspect that Aeldari will be our next player class.
Surely not a craft world Eldar, right? Not a craft world Eldar, not Dark Eldar. We're probably looking at something else.
Oh God, no. Oh yeah, no. No, definitely not. Definitely not Dark Eldar. I think that would be pretty well off the table.
Listen. Ever since Rogue Trader proved that they could have Marazai be a companion, you can have Dark Eldar. It'll just be a little weird.
I mean, here's the thing. It's just like a lot of Darktide does also parallel. It has some good overlap moments with Rogue Trader. So, that's the other thing too, is like if Rogue Trader did it, I also think that that's probably a fairly decent case study for like how things could be done in Darktide. So maybe.
I also think just in general, a lot of people need to pick up the books because 40K writing is changing. A lot of people are still very stuck in early 2000s era 40K stories where, without blinking an eye, the Inquisition would purge any and all Xenos, basically just right away. But now, and it's very apparent with games like Dark Heresy coming out, Xenos are becoming parts of inquisitorial warbands pretty often. We see it with Rogue Trader, with both just a regular Eldar and a Dark Eldar, and then we also see it with Dark Heresy, where you're gonna have a freaking like a Kroot as an ally, like just straight up. So it's becoming more and more seamless with storytelling, and I think a lot of that has to do with, one, Gilliman has his own, banging Eldar GF, and then also the show, the war, and this is kind of where a lot of the meta elements start to fall into place. Whenever the Warhammer 40K show releases on Amazon, it's probably going to try to pack in as many characters as it possibly can while telling the story from an Imperium's like POV or the Imperium perspective, but they still want to introduce and quote-unquote humanize a lot of the Xenos species, such as the Tau, the Eldar, the Votun, etc., etc. So they're gonna introduce these characters as part of these inquisitorial warbands. It just makes sense from a storytelling perspective. So a lot of 40K fans, they gotta kind of like expand their understanding of the setting and pick up a book that's released within the last like 3 years. Stop relying on knowledge from the early 2000s era. That stuff hasn't been retconned. It's just changing, just as the actual setting progresses with its narrative. So
yeah, I think that once Guilliman came back and was kind of like, had the assistance of the Eldar and everything. I think that was probably because just like his whole return and his very different perspective, and just kind of like him coming back and being like, oh shit, like we have completely messed up like what should have been our entire goal for the Imperium and like the continuation of humanity and everything. I think that he's definitely looking to not take everything. I don't think that we're going to get away from the grimdark ever, obviously, but I do think that part of the direction of 40K is going to become partially a story of like, how do they now start trying to do better for humanity instead of having everything be so awful all the time? Because also there's the whole idea and concept that like they very well may have to somewhat stop fighting each other constantly to deal with the whole Tyrannid, I almost said Terminid because I've been playing so much Helldivers lately, but to deal with the whole,
that's amazing.
Essentially Tyrannid invasion of the galaxy and everything like that. So
that, and of course the Great Rift splitting the galaxy into and basically throwing one entire half of the galaxy just in utter chaos and shambles. So all the factions are gonna have to start getting very creative.
Yeah, not necessarily friends or BFFs or anything like that, but definitely able to recognize when and where it is appropriate to say, all right, we'll
there's a greater foe. Yeah, let's set aside our differences for 5 seconds to deal with the greater foe.
Exactly.
Yep. And so yes, an Eldar class is completely possible. I think it would be very cool. I feel like with the way that Darktide's levels are designed, it would be very cool to have a more acrobatic character. One where your abilities are focused on mobility and movement, getting around terrain, literally hopping up walls, maybe being able to backtrack certain checkpoints where you normally wouldn't be able to backtrack. That would be a very, very cool character to have in the game.
I completely agree, and I also still am raising an eyebrow and eyeballing certain things where they've changed level design to include like all that extra vertical space that they have, and I'm like,
that's right.
What?
Yep.
Why did you guys do that? Like, it doesn't make any sense. You're not making use of it.
Yeah, guys, pay attention to the new use of vertical space in levels. But additionally, just kind of speaking of meta knowledge, since we know that the arbitrator was added to the game because players wanted a pet class, I've also been paying attention to the things that other studios have been adding to their games. For example, Owlcat, the guys who made Rogue Trader, they are going to be adding a Skitarii Ranger companion to Dark Heresy, their next game. And wouldn't it be phenomenal if Owlcat and Fat Shark had another crossover event like they did with the Arbites, but with a Skitarii class next summer or next year or whatever? That would be absolutely crazy if both games featured Skitarii at the same time. And then I think my last prediction would be, I want to call them squats, but they're not called squats anymore.
Oh,
Ratlings.
The dwarves.
Yeah, Ratlings.
Oh,
Jesus.
right.
No, not even the dwarves, not even Votan, or Kin rather. Ratlings. Fat Shark has said in the past, they don't want to have to deal with different perspective or camera angles for different characters. But then they created the Ogryn, which is a character that has a taller camera perspective than the other rejects in the game. And also, are people really going to sit there and believe that Fat Shark is or isn't going to add things based off of what they've previously said? Didn't they also previously say that they were going to add single player to Darktide? It's never coming, guys. It's never coming. It's not going to happen. And so they could go back on their word. It's absolutely fine. It's okay. People say things that they don't mean or that they'll never do all the time. But
I also think that Fat Shark has a tendency to be a little bit tongue-in-cheek too, because like, I mean, just recently, because you did the video on it, I think that you were the one mostly who brought it to, the attention of like, Meanie, that Shaq News interview that Victor Magnuson did with them, and just like, talking about their philosophy on Darktide and everything. And, people have been going back to that because, like earlier on, before Darktide released and shortly after, people were like, no, they said no Space Marines. And they did that Victor Magnuson did that interview. They're like, no Space Marines at all. And I'm like, you guys, they're being cheeky here. I'm pretty sure where, the only thing that he said explicitly is like, essentially,
they don't want you
loyalist
playing.
Space.
Yeah, they don't want you playing as Space Marines.
Or having NPC loyalist Space Marines. So essentially like no helpful Space Marines. And, I think that sometimes they have a tendency to not necessarily like mess with us in a malicious sense, but just kind of do, like a bit of a tongue-in-cheek thing.
Absolutely.
Being a little cheeky with us, where they're like, no Space Marines, wink, wink, wink. But like, Chaos Space Marines are different from loyalist Space Marines. So, they might be like, oh yeah, no, we don't want too many different camera angles or something like that. And then, we end up getting a Ratling, and there's some kind of, like little cheeky loophole or something in what they said. So
3 Ratlings in a trench coat.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I think it's completely possible. And if you bust out a codex, I highly recommend everyone doing this. Bust out a codex and look at what the units that are rejects are based on. A lot of them have pretty in-depth descriptions for their sheets. A lot of weapon variants, a lot of grenade variants, equipment variants, etc., etc. Look at the Ratling. There's a lot there. There's a lot that they could do with a potential Ratling class. Same with a like Sisters of Battle Novitiate, where a lot of people are saying, hey, the Novitiate would be too similar to the Zealot. In theme, yes. On the battlefield, absolutely not. There is a lot that they could do there. I think a good example is a lot of people really like playing as the Warrior Priest because they want to play as a melee support class, almost like a paladin, right? That ability, the bubble, the ability to mitigate all the damage that a player has taken within the last like 3 seconds, heal them, and the ability to make them invulnerable to damage is it's a level of skill-based support that requires decision making, and it's one of the better support playstyles that I've seen in any game, and it's not in Darktide yet. It's not available.
Yeah.
You have Chorus, you have the Zealot with Chorus, but that's a pretty mindless level of support being added to the team. More intentional and skill-based support could be coming. It's something that players want. It's something that a lot of players want. So, and then the Skitarii Ranger would just be a blaster. Like, it would be completely fan service. Like, hey, here are all these amazing AdMech guns that we know you guys want to see. Have at it.
See, and personally, so I'm a huge. I really want to see some kind of AdMech come into the game as a player.
Yeah,
class,
I think most
so
people do.
Cool.
I think with the Dawn of War 4 featuring AdMech, I think we're now at a point where we have this massive fan base of AdMech in the Warhammer 40k community. It's been growing ever since their codex was first released, like 10 years ago or whatever.
Yeah, but for me, because like I have also noticed, so in Vermintide 2, they released all those, like bonus careers for each character. And I have noticed that there's a lot of different options. So for because you brought up Saltspire's bubble specifically, I've been on the side where I'm like, I would love to see not necessarily a Skitarii, but just like, like like a tech priest or something get added to the game that is a little more support focused and like give them, like a side of the tree where they can like build into the bubble and healing and stuff like that. Give them because like Coryllian's Vine Walls from Sisters of the Thorn, that could easily be like translated into mechadendrites or something like that and have like zoning abilities, things like that. So I would love whichever direction they decide to do it. I would just be thrilled to see them do that. So consider this my Christmas list, Fat Shark.
Yes, Fat Shark, please. Please listen to this hour-long podcasty deep dive and add every detail that we've talked about into the game. Thank you.
Yes, please, and thank you.
Speaking of being about an hour long, Joe, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. I had a ton of fun. I love every and any opportunity to get to sit down with somebody and just like nerd out about 40k and Darktide.
Absolutely. And guys, I hope that you guys enjoy 40k and Darktide as much as we do. Please go over to JoPlaysGames channel, like every single video, subscribe to her channel. She is an amazing creator in the space who also covers Helldivers 2 lore, which is not something that a lot of people really dive into. And yeah, have a fantastic day, have a fantastic evening. The Emperor protects.